Hi, everyone. Dr. Tim here for another Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. And I've got Thomas Berchery from ASF, Aquarium Systems France, along with
Hello.
Dale Lewis from Reptile Systems in the UK.
Hello.
And what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a little bit of background on each of the brand's flagship products. For ASF, it'll be salt. They've been making salt, as you'll learn, for nearly 50 years. For Reef, for reptile systems, it'll be an introduction into the Ferguson zone and why we use the Ferguson zone rather than desert or forest. And then for Dr. Tim's, I'll go into a little bit about the discovery and development of our one and only live nitrifying bacteria. First up, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us on the podcast today. And can you tell us a little bit about the salt manufacturing? Because I really do, having been to your factory, you guys are the number one premier manufacturer of salt in the world. There's no
And,
doubt about that.
and you got experience, so that
Yes.
sounds good. So first, thanks for inviting me. Always nice to be able to share a little bit of the background stories, which is nice. Yeah, as you said, we make the first batch of salt in the early 1980s in France. But before that, so we are a family business. So as you know already, my dad founded the company. But my dad is making seawater and seawater mix, I would say, since the early 1970s. Because at that time in Europe, when you wanted to have, I don't know, tropical fishes, marine fishes, uh, you didn't have availability for good sea salt, or you need to go to have natural seawater, which is good, but it's not ideal for an aquarium because the natural seawater is perfect when you are in the sea as an open system, but as soon as you are in an aquarium, which is a closed system, you need different chemicals compounds, especially to have a better buffering systems. So my dad did this, I would say, in the almost 50 years that he's making seawater. So you have many different type of formulas that exist, and then you need to find the right formula that will fit the best all the characteristic of what we believe or what you believe as a consumer is a good synthetic seawater mix. Because what is the best for you? I don't know, Tim. Is it fast dissolution? Is it homogeneity? Is it good pH and buffer levels? Is it the trace element that you have inside? Is it the extra major element? I mean,
Yes,
you
we
have
want all of that.
yeah, but it's not easy because if you put pure sodium chloride, you will have a huge dissolution. It will be very fast, but you will be lacking. I don't know, calcium. Calcium is a nightmare to dissolve. I think everyone knows when you try to make a calcium mix, it's a nightmare to dissolve. So, depending on what you need, having a fast dissolving salt doesn't mean it's the best one.
Right. And that's a
But
point I
but
try to tell people. Just because it dissolves fast doesn't mean that it's good.
yeah, but it's a good sign because if it's dissolved fast, usually that means you have less molecule of water into the mix. And if an average sea salt in the market could have between 10 to 30% of water inside the mix. So depending on how the compound are used, it has an effect on dissolution. That's for
Right.
sure. That's basic number one.
Yeah, and let's go into that just for a second because you can use chemicals that are anhydrous, meaning they don't have any water. But the issue is that they're very hydroscopic. They want to take water out of the atmosphere, but also people do tend to put their hands and get salt on you. And if you have anhydrous or salt with no water, it actually can almost burn your hand. And it
Oh,
can
it burns.
be, yeah, it, because it's sucking the moisture right out.
Yeah.
So different manufacturers have tried anhydrous salts in the past, and it's really difficult in
And also
handling.
anhydrous got another issue, is that when you produce anhydrous salt, first it's very expensive to make. That's the first things. But also you have some impurities. You have some impurities because it is created by eating elements. So, for example, if you want magnesium chloride anhydrous, basically is when they create magnesium oxide. They eat at very high temperature, but potentially you can still have some impurities that you don't have in regular magnesium chloride. That's
Yeah.
or in magnesium sulfate. So it's not always the best
Yeah.
to have
So
anhydrous.
most like Thomas said, every salt's going to have a degree of water in it. And that's
Yeah.
why you need to keep your salt sealed when you're not using it too. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
salt is the enemy. The enemy in our production room is humidity. That's for sure, and that's why we need to have waterproof packaging. That's why we make small bags of salt also. So you always have fresh salt. You open one and you use it as a whole batch. No need to take a full bucket, for example. So that's important to understand, because if the salt gets moisture in, then it's going to get hard, and you can have two things that can come. That means you will have products that are not going to dissolve anymore, and dissolution is going to be much longer, and which will cause a problem of buffering. So that means your pH might take much longer to reach, which could be the case with some of our competitors. But we are very proud to say that with ASF salt, so if you use Reef Evolution in the US, you can make a water change within 5 minutes because the pH is going to be reached within 5 minutes of dissolution. So that's, for me, as a consumer and as a hobbyist, important, because if I get a problem with my aquarium and I need to do a quick water change, I know that with Reef Evolution, I can do it.
Yeah. And just
and
so
we know we
people
have public
understand,
aquariums doing this. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Just so people understand the home prod the, just so people understand, the product you've been making for nearly 50 years is Instant Ocean for the rest of
Yes.
the world. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Aquarium Systems France is the manufacturer of Instant Ocean sea salt for Japan, all of Europe, everywhere except in the United States, where it was a separate company that, I was in charge of salt production there years ago, and now that's part of another company. So here in the States, they make the Reef Evolution sea salt for us, based on all the experience of making Instant Ocean and reef crystals for nearly 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we start working really closely together, I understand much better the implication of and the importance of having bacteria in the tanks. So because most of the time when we speak about salt, we only think about chemicals point of view. So when we speak about seawater, we believe, oh, it's water with ions, major ions, and that's it. But we always forgot that in an aquarium, you need bacteria. It's a living organism. So you need also to take care of all of the bacteria that are inside the tank. Hence why when we develop, together, team, the Reef Evolution salt, we decide to add some carbon source, which is a food for the bacteria, and also some amino acids for the corals, because they do need them to have all the biological process that they need to grow.
Right. Seawater is not just chemicals. Seawater is full of a whole soup of organic and inorganic chemicals. And that's what we've tried to develop, is something that's more closely related to a natural seawater instead of being just chemicals.
Yeah.
Can you go through a little bit of the manufacturing? I know there's lots of trade secrets that you guys have developed, which I understand, but some of the key points of how your salt is different.
It's what I wanted to say when I said what is the most important part for you as a consumer for a sea salt? Is it dissolution? Is it homogeneity? Because homogeneity is thanks to manufacturing process. When you grind some of the raw materials that you're using, it's very peculiar because when you grind, you can eat the raw materials. Potentially, you can change it, which you don't necessarily want to change it. But you need to have some homogeneity in the size of the grains of the salt so that you don't have separation. So when you ship from France to the US, the container of salt, you're not going to have layers of raw materials because if potentially the size of the salts, and I put a S at the end, are not uniform, then you can have a separation. And if you don't mix the whole dose of salt, then you might happen to have, I don't know, only sodium chloride and maybe only strontium at one point, and you don't have everything you need to make perfect seawater. In our manufacturing process, what we've done, we know that the minimum size to have all the elements, and that's for us, is 18 grams. With 18 grams, we know we have all the elements inside the seawater. So 18 grams is going to make 500 ml of water. So that would be the minimum samples to have all the elements in the salt. In our case, which is quite low when you consider that some competitors says you need 4 kilos to have everything inside,
right?
Because they have this separation, so you don't have the homogeneity of the mixture.
Yeah. So step back. There's how many different chemical salts do you use to make a sea salt?
It's if you look Reef Evolution, we are about 60 different ingredients that we have to mix together.
And what happens is those ingredients, you buy those separately and they come in at different sizes. So it's just that old trick that you would do in elementary school. If you put spheres of different size together and then start shaking, they all separate out according to size. And that's what'll happen with the salt. And that's what Thomas talking about is you get the raw materials in, they're all different sizes, and they have to be carefully ground so that they're the same size so they don't separate during shipping.
Yeah, and they don't have the same I don't know how you say in English. They don't have the same weight. I mean, for the same size, you don't have the same weight.
It's like it's like a pound of feathers has a huge mass versus a pound of gold has a small mass.
Yes, correct. So all of this need to be taken into account when we manufactured our salt. So we need to be very careful on the machinery we use. So first to have the homogeneity of the size of the molecule, the weight of the molecule, and also then after you have to mix all of this and be sure that when you package all of this, you still have the homogeneity at the end of the mixtures. So for me, that's the second most important point of our salt. So the first one was quick dissolution with the pH and that is reached very fast. So in case of problem, I know I always have a bucket of salt. Well, as a salt manufacturer, it's better. But in case of problem, I know I have my backup and I can do seawater very quickly. And the second one is homogeneity. So that means wherever I am in the bucket, I know that if I take, I don't know, you say cups in English. So if I take 2 cups of water for 1 gallon, I don't know if it's correct in terms of mass, but I know I always get the same seawater, which means I have repeatability. And that means that when you make experiment or when you want to make, I don't know, spawning or whatever with your fish, you know you have repeatability all over the year. So that means once in solution, from January 1st to December 31st, you will have the same seawater with our salt.
Yeah. No. It's just like with fish food. Some fish foods use the least price formula, which means that the actual ingredients change based upon the market price of the ingredients. Others use a constant formula where this is what the formula is. This is the quality of the ingredients. It doesn't vary. And that's the same with salt. Your salt doesn't vary from the first of the year to the last of the year, from the top of the bucket to the bottom of the bucket.
The salt itself might vary, but not once in solution, because raw materials can have fluctuation. We don't use 99.99% reagent grade chemicals, because if we would do this, the salt would be more expensive than gold.
So there is also
there is also we are in the real life. There is real cost And so you need to take into all of this into account. So we use very good raw materials, which we test, because that's the other point is quality control that we do. But the salt formula might vary from time to time because the chemicals might vary from time to time.
Mm.
It's same when you buy mineral water. Sometimes you have more calcium, sometimes you have less,
Yeah.
and it's exactly the same for us. So we have to compensate for all of this all year long. But once in solution, when you take your bag of salt inside the same amount of water, you will have the same seawater for your animals, and that's very important. That's the most important part.
Talk a little bit about the source, because the biggest ingredient in sea salt is sodium chloride, and you
Yes.
use a mined sodium chloride, if I've got that
Oh,
correct, versus in
to be frank, most of our, I would say 95% of the ingredients are mined. So the thing is where we are located. So we are located near the German border, northeast of France. 200 million years ago, it was the sea. It was what they call the Germanicum Sea. And this sea, after the Earth moved, has been a closed sea and then dries out. And so we have a huge layer of salts. And again, I say salts because you, depending on how deep you are, you don't have the same chemicals. First, you have sodium chloride. If you go deeper, you could have potassium, then you have calcium, you have magnesium, all of this. So depending where you are in France or in nearby us in Germany or Netherlands, you can have some of the raw materials coming from mine. And it's not a real mine where when you think you have people getting in with diggers and sow and everything. No, it's not. The way they work is they make a hole where they inject water, and then you have another tube going up. So they inject some air to put pressure, and you have the brine. The brine, so that means the water plus the chemicals that we are looking for, that goes up. And then all of this goes in very big oven, and it dries out. And this gives you the chemicals you're looking for, depending on how deep you are going. So sodium chloride, I think, is about 60 meters deep, from 60 to 100 meters. But if you want potassium, it's 900 meters
yeah. And
deep
that's
in the ground.
versus evaporative salt. Evaporative salt is just taking ocean water and putting it in shallow ponds and letting the sun evaporate the water. But then that doesn't do anything to get rid of algae and cyanobacteria and organics that
No,
you
and
don't
and
want, things like
and it
that.
goes deeper than that. I mean, you could have the seawater that you have right now is full of microplastic. So if you use evaporative salt, you will have microplastic. You will have other pollution. If you have I don't know, if you have a big tanker on the shore and you have petrol going there, you will have petrol in the salt. It is as simple as that. In our case, the salt is from 200 million years ago, and we just pump regular water, pump up with the brine, and we dry this, and then all of this is being delivered to us, um, depending on the products, on super bags or by big food trucks, and so when it goes to us, basically you have 200 million years ago chemicals, free of pollution, free of microplastic, free of everything, just the chemicals that we need to make the mix.
Yeah. So, Thomas, I think we're going to have to end your section here, but this is super interesting, and we'll continue it with
Sure.
on another session, because this people need to understand. And when I first got years ago into manufacturing, you just don't think of how complex. It's just salt. No, it's not just salt. It takes a lot of effort and energy and ingenuity to deliver a quality product, which ASF has been doing for nearly 50 years.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that introduction, because it's
Sure.
definitely to be continued. And
Will do.
thank you again. And now to Dale. So Dale has been in the aquatic and reptile business for many years and heads up the reptile systems division of Aquarium Systems France. It's part of Aquarium Systems France. And Dale, can you introduce us to the what brought you guys into forming the Ferguson zone and basing as we continue this series of podcasts, you're going to hear the Ferguson zone in all the different almost all the different products, if not all the different products. And so that's can you introduce us to that, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Again, thank you for having me. The Ferguson zone will be on everything we discuss that contains UV. So you'll hear the Ferguson zone a lot, not just on sort of T5 lighting for reptile, but mercury vapors, lots of things that have the Ferguson zone. So Reptile Systems started making products 2017, and we had a blank canvas. So we could follow the trend by all the other manufacturers that have been going. I mean, Zoom 40 years, whatever it is, very successful. But they use the old style way of measuring UV, and that's by what they call percentage. So you mentioned earlier about tropical and desert is one way of looking at things. The other way is that tropical would be regarded as a 5% light or a 6%. Desert would be 5%, 6%. Sorry, desert would be 10%, 12%. But what does that percentage mean? Well, technically, what it means is the amount of UVB light that's emitted by that lamp. So if you consider a T5 light and you've got 100% light in a pie chart, 12% of that is UVB. But then there's no clarification to what percent of that is UVA or how much of that is then daylight. And really what we need to understand is a term called UVI, which is the ultraviolet index. Now, that's the same term that we use in the weather when we're talking for humans about what the UVI is outside. So it helps to protect us because the UVI is a measurement of UVA and UVB added together. So we really want to just look at UVI because for reptiles, they need A and UVB just as much as one or the other. B is good for the bones and the metabolism rate and the process of making vitamin D3 for the calcium. But UVA is used for vision, for determined food, for determined sex, for colors. There's so many variations why they need A and B. So actually what we want to look at is a term called UVI, ultraviolet index. And that directly leads us on to a fantastic study that was done by Dr. Gary Ferguson, hence where the name comes from, the Ferguson zones. Many years ago with lots of colleagues, and it's expanded over the decades, they categorized all the reptiles in the world, and it's still being added today, so you can see how the study's still going on, based on their basking characteristics of how much UVI that animal needed. They categorized that animal into 4 different zones. And that's it. In a nutshell, if you have an animal which is a low UVI dependent, which means it's going to be more of nocturnal, spends all of its time in the cave, so it comes out at night or it comes out first thing in the morning or last, it doesn't biologically require lots of high intense UVI, it's in zone 1. And then the other extreme of that one is zone 4. So these would be animals that would live out in the desert. I mean, there's not that many animals in zone 4 compared to zone 1, but animals that would live out in the desert at high noon, want to get so much heat, they want so much UV. We're
Are there any
talking.
zone 4 animals in the UK?
I knew this was going to be.
Only in the
I'll
inside.
just, I'll just go no. Well, there is, but they're all in zoos and private enclosures.
Yeah.
No,
We're
we
out here.
struggle.
We've got the Gila monster, native to Arizona. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Snakes.
yeah. Some tortoises, iguanas. There's not many snakes. A lot of lizard, boss monitors. Yeah, they sitting out there all the time in high sun. So basically, what they did is the Gary Ferguson and his team of colleagues over the years, they pretty much measured what that animal required. And if you imagine looking at a spreadsheet of 1,000 different reptiles, all of a sudden you can start to see a pattern that this group of animals requires a UVI of, let's say, zero point 0.7 to 1.5, and all of these ones can fit in the zone 2 of 1 to 3, and these ones can fit in 3 to 7. And they started to group all these animals based on 4 zones. So actually, that makes sense in what we want to do as reptile systems. We want to provide an easy experience for the consumer. So if they have a zone one animal, in our opinion, you would go to a store or your preferred online seller and you buy a zone one product. That way, you know that your lamp that you're about to put over your animal, which is part of your family, it's something you cherish, it's something you have to give it the right care. It's done for you. On the side of the box, on the back of the box, wherever it is, we put all the UVI readings of what you're going to get from that product for your zone one animal or your zone two animal. And you can just see there on the kind of background that I've got, everything's color coded. So blue is zone one, green is zone two, orange is zone three, and purple is zone four. You can Google now pretty much any animal on the planet. And one of the first things it'll do is it'll tell you what zone it is or what UVI it requires. So if it requires a UVI of 3, you can look at the chart. Maybe we produce these fantastic posters, which has got 300 plus animals on. And it tells you all these animals are in zone 1, all these animals are in zone 2, all these animals are in zone 3. You find your animal, find the zone, buy the zone for that product.
Right. And this, folks,
Now,
is why, sorry to interrupt here, Dale, but I want to
no,
get this point across in that you just can't go down to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a fluorescent lamp because, Dale, you've got, do I have this right? I mean, what's the difference between the zone 1, 2, and 3 and 4 is the phosphors that are in, there are, and I'm treading lightly here, Dale, you're going to have to help me.
no, that's
Well, I don't want
absolutely
to say
right.
something wrong, but there's chemicals, phosphorus. Tell us a little
Phosphors.
bit about what's in the lamps and the ratios. And you spent a lot of time with the manufacturers because these lamps are made in Germany?
Germany, yes. So they're
Germany.
all made in Germany under our supervision. They are checked and tested and batch quality control to make sure because we say that this lamp is for a zone 2, it has to fit the parameters of a UVI output between UVI 1 and UVI 3. So the lamp has to fit that zone, which is in this example zone 2. So on the back of the box, we'll write down at 18 inches from the lamp, this lamp will give you 1.4.
Yeah.
So that product has to match what we wrote. But you are correct. What goes inside the lamp is phosphors. And it's the mercury phosphor that's inside, which gives the UV radiation for the lamp. It's all safe. All the glass is completely powder coated with this. That's why the T5 lamps, when you look at them, are white. So inside is mercury, which has got UV radiation. It's kind of harnessing the sun and putting it into a tube. It's completely safe. As long as the lamp is completely covered and you can't see in the lamp at any side, that means there is no UV radiation that affects your animals or affects us. So it's completely safe to use. But we put the phosphor ratios of UVA, so ultraviolet A phosphor may go in there. And depending on which zone it is, if I was to say that a zone 1 would be approximately, say, 35% of that lamp of the white powder that goes inside would be the UVA phosphor, and maybe 2, 3, 4% would be the UVB phosphor. When they blend together, they produce this UVI, which we're reading. But that only covers us now for maybe 30, 40% of the powder inside. The rest of the white powder inside is the natural light phosphor. So this is what's in normal T5 lamps to give you that nice white light, which is going to be the light that goes inside your enclosure, and then the UV that's going to look after the animal. The trick here is zone 1 is quite easy to do because the amount of UV phosphor inside is very small. But when you get to a zone 4, you want a very high, I believe that we are still the highest UVI phosphor inside any production lamp on the market. The zone 4 lamp is incredibly high. It took 2.5 years to develop in getting the UVI right to match the zone 4 requirements of a zone 4 animal. The problem here is that we want to add in so much UVA and so much UVB phosphor to create that high UVI those animals require. You're actually not left with a lot of room to put the visible light phosphor in. So the lamp turns into this horrible bluey purple because it's all UV. So we had to come up with a way of making sure we could add visible light and UV in the same lamp together. So it provided UV for the animal, but also light for the enclosure. Otherwise, the enclosure just be, it looks bad.
Well,
So
it's
it
just
took
like
some
with
time.
reef aquariums, you really need the blue at the light at the
That's true.
right
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
nanometers, the right wavelength for the corals, but our eyes don't like it. Our eyes want white light. They want a certain look to it. And so it's the same type of thing. We
No, it's that's a great analogy of putting it that way. Actually, yeah. So we know what the animal requires, but we know what we require as well. I mean, I suppose technically we do have another product that or the industry could use. We have white LEDs, which could be used for the visible light, and a T5 tube could be used for UVI only. The problem is that doesn't really happen, and we produce things like we do a product called an Eco T5 unit, which houses the T5 lamp, um, and that has a reflector on, so it turns into an all-in-one product. And UV is the visible light is the delivery mechanism to put that UV through the skin of the animal, so it kind of turns into an all-in-one. Um, Using the Ferguson zones is a very simple method. It's simple for the consumer. It's simple for the stores. If you're researching it on the website, everyone's now talking about the Ferguson zones. It's quite interesting in the last, maybe 4 or 5 years how other companies and advertising and influencers and social media have started to turn and talk about Ferguson zones. I even saw a fantastic reptile store the other week where they've got stickers in the corner that says this animal is a zone 2, this animal is zone 3. And it was all part of the price label with their size and their kind of care guide. And it was just interesting that it's now being spoken about by vets. It's now being spoken about by others. And it's becoming quite an industry standard way of categorizing animals to the masses. So there's still a lot more education that needs to come of it. And I think one of the big things is there's a product on the marketplace called a solar meter. Now, the solar meter is a fairly inexpensive device. I think in the US it's about $250 to $300. It's expensive for what it is, but it measures the UVI of your lamp to the perfect requirement, about 97% the perfect wavelength that reptiles need. If you have one bearded dragon, that's an expensive product to test that lamp to make sure that that lamp is still emitting the right UVI for your bearded dragon. What you could save on replacing your lamp every 9 months, 12 months, that $300 purchase is quite big. But if you've got 6 enclosures, 10 enclosures, the solar meter 6.5R, the one that's required to measure the UVI, that actually could be quite a good investment to make sure that your animals are all getting the right UVI levels. Now we use like high grade machinery to measure the UVI, but the final check we do is always with a 6.5 $300 handometer as well, because there's no point us measuring the UVI on an integrated sphere that costs $12,000 if it measures a different UVI to the handheld device.
what people have exactly, yeah.
So we all our final batch control. Once we're happy with the product, it goes into mass production. We get the 3 or 4 sizes of T5 lamps. We'll burn the lamp for 100 hours. After 100 hours, all that phosphor we spoke about a minute ago between the UVA, the UVB is all mixed. It's perfectly mixed into a ratio inside the lamp, and then you're getting a nice. You can then take a perfect measurement. There will be 10 to 15, maybe 20% different of your UVI reading on hour 1 of burning the lamp to hour 100 burning the lamp. So we always recommend to burn the lamp for 100 hours before you take a UVI measurement to see if it matches.
Yeah. So you got to
But we
burn
use
the lamp, but then the lamps only last, like you said, 9 to 12 months.
yeah. So with reptile systems, we say 1 year, one lamp. That's our goal is 1 year, one lamp, and that's based on 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for your animal. In terms of the UV, the biggest problem we have is a T5 lamp. Just that daylight phosphor we spoke about in the lamp, that will last for years, years and years and years. Maybe 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. The filament inside the lamp and the ballast will probably burn out before the daylight phosphor does. But that's not what we want. We want the UV phosphor,
Awesome.
and that mercury will disappear in 1 year. That UV essence that we need will, and we can't see this. And that's the problem. If you speak to someone that's had their lamp for 18 months, oh no, my lamp's still working. It's lit. My enclosure's bright. But the UV disappeared 6 months, 7 months ago. And that's when we have the problem in if the reptile keeper is in the store on a regular occasion. I've seen some retail stores do fantastic jobs on this where if someone buys a lamp, they'll take their email address. And then in 1 year's time, or 11 months' time, 10 months' time, they email the consumer and say it's time to replace the lamp. There's lamp reminder guides, there's lamp reminder apps, there's lots of things you can do between putting a note in a diary to send you an alert. But one of the biggest problems we have, we go to the shows, Tim, we've been there. When's the last time you replaced the lamp? Oh, no, it's 2 years. Like, and it still works, but the UV is gone, and it's that part that we need to convince people. They can't see it, so it's a bit like the king's clothes. You can't see it, so is it gone? Is it still there? That's why testing the lamp. I believe that most shops have got a solar meter, so if you are ever concerned, I know one of the services I spoke to a store in the US before. They offer people to bring their lamp to the store, and they will check the lamp for the consumer. I thought that was a great service. So it's all about animal welfare, and that's one of the reasons why the Ferguson zones were even created by Dr. Gary Ferguson in the original, was because there was no research to say what UVI or what requirements he needs for his animal. So yes, that's animal welfare, animal safety is why we do it, and it's also why the Ferguson zone was created. And that's why we've adopted these zones into reptile systems.
Oh, thank you, Dale, for that quick introduction. And we'll be going deeper into the Ferguson zone with more examples and the correct way to use it in future podcasts.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is, if you've been a long-time listener to Dr. Tim's Aquatics, you know our flagship product is the one and only live nitrifying bacteria, which long time ago, I've been keeping aquariums since I was a little kid, and I actually wrote a letter when I was like 10 years old because I had bought nitrifying bacteria from a company to start my tank, and it didn't work, and I wanted my money back, and I did get my money back. But flash forward is that just nitrifying bacteria seems simple. There's, you've heard it. There's the ammonia oxidizer, nitrous ammonium that oxidizes ammonia to nitrite. And then Nitrobacter winogradsky oxidizes nitrite to nitrate. And that was it. It didn't matter whether it was fresh water, salt water, low temperatures, high temperatures. Those were the two bugs. And that's all wrong. And I didn't start out to show that. I did my PhD at UC Santa Barbara on nitrifying bacteria in aquaria. And then I was also looking at nitrifying bacteria in Mono Lake, California, but that's a story for another day. And it turns out, and if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense in that why would there just be two species of nitrifying bacteria for everything? And if you're really interested in this, you can go to our webpage, drtimsaquatics.com, into the resource section. And I wrote a 3-part series for Coral Magazine that goes through kind of the history and the development and the science, because science is always progressing because we get better tools to look deeper and separate things out and ask better questions. And the reason that we scientists and then hobbyists read books and papers from scientists thought there were just these two was because of they were called culture methods. We'd take a sample from a different environment, but we always cultured the bacteria the same way. So we always got the same answer because we were using high levels of ammonia and high levels of nitrite. And that turns out to be the big dividing line. When you're looking at nitrifying bacteria in aquariums, think about it. We don't have 50 milligrams per liter or 50 parts per million ammonia or nitrite. We're not a sewage treatment, a waste treatment plant. We're at the much lower levels. And that was the key thing that I showed was that at these lower ammonia and lower nitrite levels, you have different species of nitrifying bacteria. And that's why if you look at our guides on fishless cycling, and we always talk about don't let your ammonia get too high. And don't pay attention to all these quote microbiology experts on the forums that talk about none of this matters. It matters. It's been shown. My work's been repeated by many others and expanded, and there's all sorts of novel research coming out of Australia, Germany. There's a whole research institute on nitrifying bacteria at the University of Vienna. And without going deep into the weeds, nitrifiers vary depending upon the environment that they're in. If you're going to be in a very cold water tank below 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to have ammonia oxidizing archaea instead of ammonia oxidizing bacteria. So the environment makes a difference, and that's what I showed. Secondly, so the take home from that is that we grow the bacteria that you need. We don't grow sewage water bacteria. We grow aquarium bacteria, meaning nitrifiers that grow at low ammonia and low nitrite levels. And that's why our guide talks about don't add so much ammonia. The number one problem we have is people think bacteria are humans and they have to eat every day or 3 times a day, and they just dose ammonia like crazy and get the ammonia and the nitrite level super high. Everything stalls out. Secondly, you have to look at that the nitrifying bacteria live on surfaces. If you go back to my original papers, again, I'm sure you want to read all my scientifically published papers. Great for insomnia. But I filtered lots of water, aquarium water, and came up with emptiness. There was no nitrifiers in the water. Well, nitrifiers grow on surfaces. So that's how we developed One and Only, is that we actually grow the bacteria on a small surface. That's why you have to shake it up. If you took a bottle of our One and Only, shook it up, put it in a glass, and it would settle very quickly, and you'll see that there's a lot of sludge at the bottom, and the water's the top is clear. The nitrifiers are grown on a particle because that's where they're most comfortable, and that's what we're trying to do. Much like the Ferguson zone is trying to replicate the natural environment, or reef evolution is trying to replicate real seawater, not a pure chemical seawater, because fish don't live in that pure chemicals. Corals don't live in those pure chemicals. They live in a manouge. There's a French word there, Thomas. Menu? My French is terrible.
No.
A soup, an organic soup, a soup of
Okay.
Of organic and inorganic. That's the same with the bacteria, is they live on surfaces in their EPS, and that helps protect them. Because I don't know if it's the first or the second biggest question is, well, bacteria can't live in a bottle, they can't breathe. Bacteria don't have lungs, okay? They don't breathe. They only need oxygen in the presence of ammonia or nitrite to convert the ammonia to nitrite or nitrite to nitrate. So that's in the background of how we developed our product. One is we isolated nitrifiers from our own systems, our own tanks. purified them. They're not genetically engineered. I get that a lot. No, they're just at a higher concentration. We put them on a particle so that they last longer in the bottle, and it's date labeled so that you can easily see. And even that date label doesn't mean it's expired. They don't starve to death. Bacteria have been around for a long, long time, and nitrifiers are actually quite tough. You If you freeze them solid, that will kill them, or if you poison them with hydrogen sulfide, that will kill them. Otherwise, they're kind of like a rechargeable battery. They go in the bottle at top shape and they slowly lose the energy, the timeliness of how fast they're going to work. But the cells are viable, they're not dead, and they'll still work after a year or 2 years. They haven't died. The bacteria cell is completely different than a human body cell. So still adding a quote product by, that's why we put a best buy, not expired, because it's still good. And it just may take a few more days for the bacteria to, I don't like the word, but I'll use it, wake up and start working, but they're still going to work faster than doing nothing. So shake the
What's just
bottle. Yeah.
what sort of date do you put on the bottles, Tim? Just for my interest.
We put an 18-month from bottling date. Famous
So if a
saying, we
customer,
bottle no bacteria before their time.
so when you say that there's a time, they're good for 18 months, but then they're still good after that. If a consumer did get a bottle, let's just say a store didn't do a very good stock rotation, and the bottle was expired according to the date, what's the damage? Is there any damage? It's still good though, right?
It's still good. What's going to happen is the nitrite oxidizers are going to take longer. They're always the most critical one. So what you'll have is that the ammonia will get converted within a couple of days. Usually with a fresh product, it's within 2 or 3 days. With a product past the best buy date, it might take 4 or 5 days for the ammonia to start converting.
Okay.
But with the nitrite, it's going to take maybe 8 to 12 days. With fresh product, if you follow our guide, you're cycled in 12 days. Ammonia nitrite, you're done. With a product past its best buy date, the nitrite's going to hang around, and it's probably going to take more like 18 to 20 days to completely cycle. But that's still a whole lot better than 35 or 45 days.
So the product's still good, just needs to
Yeah.
kind of be more patient.
The number one thing is when you open the bottle, if it smells like rotten eggs, then it's bad. Then you've got to throw it away because that's hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide will poison the cells. So really, product that is bad and you do not want to pour into your tank is anything that smells like hydrogen sulfide, and that goes with all products, whether you're using like our waste away or anyone's products. If you have organics in there, and they'll eventually decay, and if through bacterial action, and what eventually happen is that the sulfate reducing bacteria in the last stages of the product, when it's anaerobic or anoxic, no oxygen, will start producing hydrogen sulfide. And that's that rotten egg smell. Never pour anything that smells like rotten eggs into your aquarium,
But
because
how does
that
it
will
get to
kill
that? Is
everything.
that because how does a bottle get to that stage? That means it's got to be too hot, too cold.
Well,
how
just
would a
just
bottle get?
too old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or well, it's got to go anoxic, and that's something we learned. I was the head of research at Marineland for 18 years, where I developed the Biospira, and we put those in foil pouches. Well, the mistake there was the foil pouches were completely a barrier to any oxygen coming in. So it
Sealed.
was, yeah, it was sealed. And once all these bacterial processes, you go from aerobic to anaerobic to anoxic. And that generally doesn't happen in most plastic bottles because they don't have a film and small amounts of oxygen can get in there longer. It doesn't mean it doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
because
It takes
it's made
longer.
of PE. That's
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. Where the foil pouches, yeah, a couple of years they were anoxic, and because the bacteria, none of these are pure cultures. They've all got some heterotrophs in there, which break down the organics and just keep on feeding on different things. Yep.
That must have been a very nice smell to open the foil
Yes.
pouches.
Well, it happens in live sand and in other products, and we get this all the time where people, oh yeah, I've got this product, it stunk, it was terrible, it reeked, and I poured it right into my aquarium. How come nothing's working? Well, why would you pour that into your aquarium? Well, it's sad, So number,
If you don't
if
want to
it's
eat it, don't put it.
yeah, don't, yeah, yeah. If it's like, oh, then yeah, don't put it. Nothing like that. So.
That's the same in life generally. If it smells that bad, you shouldn't touch it either. That's
Yeah.
that's
Okay, on that note, I think we're going to end. We're kind of out of time, but we're going to continue this. There's lots of information. The combined experience that you're looking at here is a lot. All of us started when we were kids. Tomas grew up in a sea salt manufacturing facility.
Yeah.
So Dale too. And I've had my first tank for still have it. So we're going to continue on focusing on this and doing deeper dives into each one of these topics and more. But for right now, I want to thank Thomas and Dale for joining me and doing a quick introduction on really the keystone. And if you heard it, it's all about using science to develop products that care for the animals. The animals are number one.
Yeah.
And providing explanations and simple. There's nothing labeled magic around here. It's experience and knowledge to create products. If it's magic,
don't you have a wand like Harry Potter? No.
Yeah, no, Harry Potter. Thanks, everyone. This has been Dr. Tim with another Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. Till next time, good fish keeping.